This video is sponsored by Audible. For a free audiobook, use the link in the description below. Welcome back to the series where I'm tier ranking all 256 combinations of Twinborn types from Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. This is part 10, which means after this part, we will have ranked 160 Twinborn combinations. As always, some of the names come from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, but most of them were created by myself and other users in the Exploring the Cosmere Discord server. If you're interested in helping name Twinborn types for future videos, make sure you join the Discord. I'll link it in the description. Without further ado, let's get into this tier ranking. First up, we have Tick. Ticks can use their allomantic aluminum to wipe internal allomantic reserves within themselves, and they can use their ferrochemical electrum to store determination. This is a gnat in the Twinborn world. Their allomantic aluminum doesn't do much for them, especially if they're staying on Scadrial. Since they can't burn other allomantic metals, it's almost useless, but it can be used to get rid of external or foreign investiture that's used upon them. So it does have a little bit of usefulness, but I'm gonna put it in D tier. Next up, we have Burnout. Burnouts can use their allomantic bend alloy to speed up time in a bubble around themselves, and they can use their ferrochemical brass to store warmth. Okay, I don't think these two powers build upon each other, so I'm not going to rank it very high. But I have speculated before that maybe a Twinborn with allomantic bend alloy could throw up their speed bubble around themselves and then start storing in their metal mind. So from their perspective, they would still be storing at a typical rate, but from an outside perspective, it would look like they filled up that metal mind rapidly. But yeah, I don't see these two powers really working together, so I'm just going to have to put it straight in B tier. Next up, we have Schemer. Schemers can use their allomantic brass to soothe the emotions of others, and they can use their ferrochemical zinc to store mental speed. The name Schemer comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and they have the reputation of being quick-witted deceivers. I think this is a pretty great combination. Allomantic brass makes it so that you can basically manipulate other people by toying with their emotions to get them to be more likely to do what you want. We see Breeze use this all the time in Era 1. He does it almost unconsciously. He's just constantly nudging people's emotions around him, basically making them like fill up his cup of wine or carry his things for him. Things like that. And ferrochemical zinc, whenever you're actively storing your mental speed, your thoughts are going to come slower. But then whenever you're tapping that mental speed at a later time, you're going to be able to think rapidly. I think that these two could be used in combination so that you can read body language cues while you're actively tapping your mental speed and determine what would be the best emotion to manipulate at any given time. I think a schemer Twinborn would be great as like a diplomat or a politician. Maybe. Really any type of social position they wanted would come easy to them. I'm gonna put this in S tier. Next up, we have Crasher. Crashers can use their allomantic steel to push metals, and they can use their ferrochemical iron to store physical weight. The name Crasher comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and they have their reputation of being exceptionally destructive and dangerous. Crasher is a really good combination. Wax from Era 2 is a Crasher, so we see this combination in action quite a bit. I think the two powers work extremely well together. Whenever you're storing your physical weight in your iron mind, you can make yourself light enough so that you can jump from any height, and wind resistance will slow you to the point where you can land safely. We see Sazed do this in Era 1, and I'm pretty sure Wax does this as well in Era 2. Making yourself lighter would also make it easier for the Crasher to push themselves around using their allomantic steel. And then when you're actively tapping your iron mind, you can make yourself very, very heavy. We see Wax do this in Era 2. He makes himself heavier than a building for a split second by tapping, I think it's about a month's worth of stored weight all at once. And making yourself heavy can be very good when you are steel pushing against something. So if you make yourself heavier than a skyscraper, for instance, and you steel push on a skyscraper at the same time, you could literally knock that skyscraper over. It would be pretty crazy. But that's an extreme example. You could constantly just be increasing your weight and making it easier to push against anything in day-to-day life, whether that's pushing weapons out of somebody's hands or pushing against a metal doorknob to keep the door shut. We see that Wax is able able to push around himself with his steel uniformly and make a bubble around himself almost, and it can block bullets and other projectiles that are coming towards him. I can't remember if that's a resonance between these two powers or if that's because he's a steel savant. Let me know in the comments if you remember. Crasher is a great combination. I can't put it in busted though. I think I'll put it at the top of S tier. If you guys think that it is busted, make an argument for that in the comment section and I can reconsider it in the final part of this video where I make final arrangements on the whole compiled tier list. Next we have Ambush. Ambush Twinborn can use their Allomantic Cadmium to slow down time, and they can use their Ferrochemical Pewter to store physical strength. This is a pretty interesting combination. Normally Allomantic Cadmium isn't that great for the Allomancer because they slow down time in a bubble around themselves, so everything outside of that bubble looks like it's moving in rapid succession. And from the outside looking into the bubble, it looks like the Cadmium Allomancer is barely moving at all. It looks like they're basically frozen in time. But when you couple that ability with the Ferrochemical Pewter, where you're able to store up your physical strength and then tap it to make yourself stronger at a later time, it could be pretty useful. The Ambush Twinborn could increase their physical strength and grab onto somebody and restrain them and then throw up their Allomantic Cadmium bubble while reinforcements arrive. So that could be really good for like a law enforcement position. That's probably the best use case for this type that I can think of. I think Ambush is pretty good. It's very unique and almost can only be used in niche circumstances. I think it's going to go in A tier for me though. Next up we have Stopwatch. Stopwatches can use their Allomantic Cadmium to slow down time in a bubble around themselves, and they can use their Ferrochemical Tin to store senses. I think this is an example of a Twinborn type with Allomantic Cadmium that just isn't that great. When you throw up your Cadmium bubble and you slow down time in that bubble around yourself, I don't think that tapping your tin would do much for you. Even if you are able to still hear and see well outside of the bubble, everything's going to be moving so quickly that your mind won't even be able to process it. I think Stopwatch is going to have to go C tier for me. Then we have Breathcatcher. Breathcatchers can use their Allomantic Brass to soothe emotions, and they can use their Ferrochemical Cadmium to store breath. This combination isn't that great at all. Allomantic Brass is always a good power even on its own, but Ferrochemical Cadmium doesn't do much. I mean, whenever you're storing your breath, you're going to be hyperventilating. It's going to feel like you can't catch your breath. And then you can tap that at a later time to go without the need to breathe. If your hobby is deep sea diving, it might come in handy. And in the space age of the Cosmere, it might come in handy. But right now, what we've seen so far, I don't think it would be useful. Breathcatcher is going to have to go C tier for me, but it's going ahead of Stopwatch. Next up we have Philosopher. Philosophers can use their Allomantic Cadmium to slow down time in a bubble around themselves, and they can use their Ferrochemical Zinc to store mental speed. So where the Stopwatch lacked the mental capacity to be able to see what was going on outside of the bubble in rapid succession, this Twinborn type has that capacity. So if they store up enough of their mental speed and then they throw up their Cadmium bubble, they should be able to tap that mental speed and actually observe what's happening outside of the bubble and process it. I don't know how useful that would be necessarily. I'm trying to think of any other use case for this. I mean, you could basically just watch the world pass by like you're watching a time-lapse video. It's a unique combination, but I don't think it's that great. It's gonna go in C tier. Next up we have Whistler. Whistlers can use their Allomantic Bend alloy to speed up time in a bubble around themselves, and they can use their Ferrochemical Cadmium to store breath. I don't think that Ferrochemical Cadmium would add on to this Allomantic Bend alloy power in any way that I can see. Whistler is another C tier combination for me. Next up we have Metalbreaker. Metalbreakers can use their Allomantic Chromium to wipe the Allomantic reserves of a target, and they can use their Ferrochemical Pewter to store physical strength. The name Metalbreaker comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and they have the reputation of never fighting fair. Alright, so to use your Allomantic Chromium, you have to go up and physically touch the person that you're wiping the reserves from, and then burn your Chromium. And as long as that other person has Allomantic reserves within themselves, those reserves will vanish. I think this is a pretty great combination. a Metalbreaker would be really good at fighting other Allomancers. The increased strength that they get when they're tapping their ferrochemical pewter would be great in a fight for obvious reasons. You're going to be stronger, it's going to be easier for you to handle your opponent, and then having the ability to wipe that opponent of any allomantic reserves basically nerfs that other person. It turns them back into a normal human without allomantic abilities. I could see a Metalbreaker acting as the muscle of some Allomancer crew, or I could also see them being on law enforcement and using it in the field when they're chasing down rogue Allomancers. Yeah, Metalbreaker is a really good combination. I think it's going to go in S tier for me. Next up, we have Shelter. Shelters can use their allomantic copper to hide allomantic pulses, and they can use their ferrochemical duralumin to store connection. The name Shelter comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and they have the reputation of being an allomancer's best friend. As long as they have enough of their connection stored up, they can tap that connection and make other people look to them as a friend or a very charismatic person in general. So yeah, other Allomancers would probably love being around them. That, coupled with the fact that they can hide the other Allomancers' allomantic pulses, they would make a perfect member to a Allomancer team. Allomantic copper also has the benefit of protecting the Allomancer from emotional allomancy. So the Shelter would never have to worry about having their emotions manipulated as long as they're burning their allomantic copper. Ferrochemical duralumin is good when you're storing your connection as well, because you can make it so other people don't notice you. You can basically go ghost mode. For that reason, it would be great for espionage purposes. Also, tapping connection should let you speak the local language when you're in foreign lands. A Shelter would be amazing to have on your team when you're sneaking into an enemy base, for instance. You wouldn't have to worry about your allomancy giving you away as long as the Shelter's burning copper, and the Shelter themselves could be storing their connection, so they would be extra hidden. I'm putting Shelter in S tier. Next up, we have Ant. Ants can use their allomantic aluminum to wipe the internal allomantic reserves of themselves, and they can use their ferrochemical pewter to store physical strength. This is another example of a gnat in the Twinborn world, so I'm putting them in D tier. Next, we have Brainstorm. Brainstorms can use their allomantic nigrosyl to enhance the allomantic burn of a target, and they can use their ferrochemical zinc to store mental speed. To use allomantic nigrosyl, you need to be physically touching the target that you are enhancing the allomancy of. So when you burn your nigrosyl, as long as that other allomancer that you're touching is burning an allomantic metal, that allomantic metal reserve that they're burning will be used up in an instant, and all that power will be unleashed at once. I think this is a pretty decent combination. I think a Brainstorm on a team of allomancers could tap their mental speed to almost intuitively know who needs a Nicroburst. And they can also use their Nigrosyl offensively, so they could kind of overload the senses of an enemy burning tin, for instance, by making them burn that whole reserve at once. Brainstorm is going to fall in A tier for me. Next up, we have Marathoner. Marathoners can use their allomantic pewter to increase their physical strength, and they can use their ferrochemical cadmium to store breath. The name Marathoner comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and their reputation is that they're known for being utterly tireless. Alright, so when you burn pewter, you do get stronger, but you also have increased endurance, you heal faster, your dexterity increases, and your agility and balance in general increases. We've seen allomancers do what they call pewter dragging, where they will basically flare their pewter for extended periods of time while they're running, and that will allow them to run for hours upon hours at a time without needing to take a break. I think that coupling that with ferrochemical cadmium could be pretty useful, depending on how ferrochemical cadmium functions, which the Ars Arcanum from the Lost Metal says Gasper Pharynx can store breath inside a cadmium metal mine. During active storage, they must hyperventilate in order for their bodies to get enough air. The breath can be retrieved at a later time, eliminating or reducing the need to breathe using the lungs while tapping the metal mine. They can also highly oxygenate their blood. Okay, so it does highly oxygenate the blood when tapping a cadmium mine. I think that could be very useful for pewter drag dragging. It would probably make the marathoner even faster than a normal Allomancer burning pewter. Maybe it would make you heal faster. It would probably make your reaction time even faster than somebody with just Allomantic pewter. I just thought that you might be able to burn your Allomantic pewter and then store your breath in your cadmium mine at a faster rate than normal. I think that these two powers build on one another extremely well. I think a marathoner would excel in any type of physical activity. They can't be stopped. They keep going until the job's done. I'm gonna put marathoner and busted. That's a really good combination. Next up, we have sprinter. Sprinters can use their Allomantic pewter to increase their physical strength, and they can use their ferrochemical steel to store physical speed. The name sprinter comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and they have their reputation of being faster than a speeding bullet. Okay, so this is another really good combination. Like I talked about with marathoner, a sprinter could also use their pewter to pewter drag, and that already on its own makes the Allomancer very fast. If I remember correctly, we see in Era 1 that Allomancers who are pewter dragging can outrun horses. So they're already incredibly fast and have incredible stamina. Now couple that with ferrochemical speed and they probably would be borderline speeding bullet speeds. I'm imagining a sprinter in a fight and I feel like it would be kind of like Rock Lee versus Gara. It would feel like the sprinter was everywhere at once. You'd be getting hit from all different angles. It would be pretty insane. I also think that this combination is really good for when you're storing your physical speed. As long as you're burning your Allomantic pewter, your speed will already be increased. So if you just store all that excess speed as you're burning your pewter, you could walk around like normal. You wouldn't even notice that you're storing speed, and you'd still be building up your ferrochemical steel reserve. This combination absolutely has to go in busted. It's going ahead of marathoner for me. And actually, since I'm putting sprinter in busted, I think marathoner has to drop down to the top of S tier. They are pretty similar, but sprinter is just better out of the two. And the last combination for this part is Soulshot. Soulshots can use their Allomantic steel to push metals, and they can use their ferrochemical aluminum to store identity. We know almost nothing about ferrochemical aluminum. Even the Terrace community hasn't experimented with it very much. So I don't think that this is a great combination at all. It's probably gonna have to go in C tier for me. All right, there is the final ranking for part 10. Let me know if you would rank these combinations differently down in the comments. We have 96 more combinations to rank, so if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you know when part 11 drops. Become a patron or a channel member at the Arcanist tier or higher to get access to high quality versions of these graphics. You can also get a free audiobook thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Audible. All you have to do is use the link in the description and sign up for an Audible Premium Plus 30-day free trial. After you sign up, you'll receive an Audible credit, and you can use this credit to get any audiobook of your choice. Being an Audible member also gives you access to thousands of other audiobooks and podcasts in the Audible Plus catalog. This is a really good deal. This is a free book that you get to keep even if you decide to cancel your membership. So once again, to get your free audiobook, use the link in the description below. That's it for this video, guys. I'll see you in part 11.